So let's begin with the Finance Committee as we look into these resources to help you understand what you've been called into. The Finance Committee is the committee that has overall responsibility for handling the funds, the apportionments, for raising the money. And so what I want to do is reference you to the Book of Discipline. In the Book of Discipline, paragraph 258.4 deals with the Finance Committee. So I'd encourage you to look at that, and I also encourage you to look at these slides 2 through 10 as you look at the slide deck that's hanging on the website. Look at 2 through 10, and that'll carry you through what we're doing. You may actually want to print out this complete slide deck and be able to look at it as you listen to this. So just what is your job as the Finance Committee? It's pretty easy. It's a three-part. You got to identify, you got to perfect, and you got to manage. Now those are some big fancy words, I know that. I went to Delta State. We like nice, easy words. So I changed it to say it's the process of raising, managing, and dispersing. We raise the money, we manage the money, and we disperse that money so that the mission and vision of the congregation can be achieved. Not might be achieved, ought to be achieved, it can be achieved if we listen to God and follow God's call on our life. So as we begin to look at this Finance Committee, you're made up of a group named by the discipline. There's a chairperson. Now that chairperson is not the do-all, see-all, make everything happen all. That's the captain of the team. Now if you're interested in being a king or a queen or a czar, I understand over in England they're looking for a new king or queen, knowing that they're going to need one before long. So if you want to do that, go over there and apply for that job. But if you want to be the team captain, if you want to see the finance team really work together, you're just in the right place. Remember, if you do the job for them, then you're cheating the others of their gifts that God's given them, and you're cheating God's gift of calling people into God's ministry. So chairperson, you don't do it all. You don't answer it all. You don't decree it all. You make sure the team is working together. Your pastor is a part of the Finance Committee. Do not call Finance Committee meetings and say, oh, Pastor, don't worry about it. You just preach, we'll raise the money. No. The pastor needs to know the finances of the church. The pastor needs to understand what's available, what have we got, what can we do. Because if the pastor expects too little by saying, oh, I know we don't have enough money because that's what Joe said, then the pastor's not going to push us and have us stretch to our utmost ability. And there again, if we say, oh, we got plenty of money, Pastor, do what you want to do, and the pastor dreams and thinks and plans big ministry, and then there's not money to fund it. You see, either side of that's bad, so the pastor needs to be in the call, and the pastor has full voice and full vote inside the Finance Committee. Be absolutely certain that you understand that. There's the chairperson of the council or board, whatever governance you're under. And that's important because they're the ones that plan the program. They're the ones that lead the church. They're the ones that make the decisions of what's going on programmatically, ministerially, mission-minded work that's done in the church. And so that lay member, that chair of the council or board has got to be there because they got to understand what they're doing. There's the lay member of annual conference. That's the person that goes to conference to understand what are we doing as a connectional system. Now y'all realize that's the beauty of the United Methodist Church. We know that we can't do everything, but we know that if each of us bring our little part to the table, then we can do all that God's called us to do. Because God never calls us to do anything that God hadn't first resourced us. So that lay member of annual conference goes to annual conference, learns the ministry, and comes home and helps explain those pesky little mission shares. Oh, I love the mission shares because that's our work together. But a lot of you kind of call them different names that are not really what mission shares are, but that's all right. That's all right. If you're talking about them, you're learning the ministry, and when you learn the ministry, you'll say, hey, I want to be a part of it. So lay member of annual conference, come and listen so that you can answer the question, just what do we get out of those mission shares that we have to pay to the annual conference? You'll move from have to pay to want to pay when you learn how we're the arms and feet and legs of Jesus as we walk through this world doing that ministry. Then there's the chairperson or the representative from the Pastor Parish Relations Committee. Now, it doesn't have to be the chairperson. The committee may send a representative, and that's very important because if you stop and think about it, somewhere between 40 and 50% of an average church budget goes into personnel. And so if that much money is being spent, don't they need a place at the table to help the church, help the finance committee understand where that money's going? Now remember very clearly, Finance Committee, you have no authority to change the budget that comes to you for the clergy salaries. Those come to you and they go forward as written by the pastor parish to charge conference. That's where we adopt the budget for the clergy of our local church. The rest of that budget comes from Pastor Parish Relations Committee in resourcing the pastor and doing the work in the local church. So normally they put a lot of work, a lot of time into that, figuring what they need and what they need to go forward with. And you can certainly comment on it. You can certainly say, wow, that's a lot of money. Or is it one opportunity we had in my local church? They said, is that all we're paying the pastor? And we expect the pastor to do all these things, then we need to give her a raise. And they actually voted a raise in charge conference. Now think about that. That's pretty backwards from what we normally think is going to happen. So the chairperson for the Pastor Parish Relations Committee will come to the committee, will explain where the money's being spent, how it's being spent, how they're working with that, following processes for reimbursement account, and all those things that need to come out of finance. But the ultimate authority for what that budget level is belongs to the church conference. The next person on the list is the trustee representative. Well, somewhere between 15 and 25% of the trustee budget, of the total budget, belongs to the trustees. That really depends on, do you have a note on the building or is the building paid for? Is the building older and there's a lot of repairs that are going on in place of a note that has to be done? So the trustee budget, 15 to 25%, and so they have a seat at the table. Notice that it's either a representative or the chair selected by the trustees. They will send forward the person that understands finances, that understands how to work together with the finance committee and the trustees to keep God's house welcoming. That's their job. Then there's the chairperson on the ministry group of stewardship. Now let me tell you, if you do not have a stewardship committee, Sunday morning, I want you to find your pastor and say, Pastor, we need a stewardship committee. Folks, raising the money for budget is not stewardship. Stewardship tells how we help people understand why they should give, why they want to give, and how that is caring for the resources God's given us, whereas the finance committee's more focus is on top of how do we spend it effectively for all the items going on. A chairperson on the ministry group of stewardship must be there. Then there's the lay leader. The lay leader is the one that works right alongside of the pastor, that helps the pastor think through, know what's going on. That lay leader doesn't tell the pastor what to do. It's not a, here's what's happening, pastor, you need to know what's going on. It's, pastor, here's kind of what our church is thinking. This is what we've done in the past. Don't fall in that hole. Let me help you from falling in the hole. We can all find another hole to fall in as we're trying to lead in the ways that we need to lead. So that lay leader works right along with the pastor to be absolutely certain that the things happen inside of that finance committee and we better understand what's going on. Then the beauty of the United Methodist Church is that discipline says, and anybody else you may need. Now, you know, getting to be a Sunday school teacher is a lifetime event. You gotta die to get out of teaching Sunday school. Don't make people like that on the finance committee. You invite them in. You say, hey, we need help on understanding. And as soon as we accomplish that goal, you can get off the finance committee. You see, you gave them an exit process. They'll get in, they'll get their work done, and they'll go. Really, it is an opportunity to reach out. If you've got a new note on the building, if money's kind of quit coming in to pay the note, then you may need somebody to help you with a fundraiser, a capital campaign. If people are not understanding how this money's being spent, you may need a good communications person to come in and help you put together a plan, not to just list numbers in a budget. You know, us numbers geeks, we love numbers. But I'm going to tell you, I've learned, my wife's an English teacher, I've learned if I use a lot of words to tell where the numbers are going, people better understand it and people will give better. So you see, there are different things that we need in different times of our lives of the church. And so that's the beauty of the Finance Committee. You can invite them in, they can be a part, they can have voice, they can have vote, they can have leadership inside the Finance Committee, and when they've accomplished their goals, they're done, they're out, they move on. Now, there's a group that has no vote but has full voice, and that's the group of people that are paid to work in finance. Your financial secretary, your treasurer, your benefits administrator if you're in one of the larger churches. If they're being paid, they have no vote. Now trust me, I'm one of them. I got plenty of voice. I can tell you all you want to know plus some. But when it comes to a vote, I can't vote on anything that relates to my compensation. And that's the reason there's no vote for people that are paid, the financial secretary, the treasurer, the business administrator. Now wait a minute, I said just a minute ago, the pastor's on the Finance Committee with full vote and full voice. And that's because the discipline says the pastor is. So be careful, don't tell the pastor they can't vote. The pastor has full vote by discipline. So that's who makes up our committee. The chairperson, the pastor, the lay member of annual conference, the chairperson of the council of board, whatever kind of governance is leading that church. That's who that is. Pastor Parish Relations Committee, the trustees representative, the chairperson on the ministry group of stewardship that I'm sure every one of you are going to have within the next week or 10 days, the lay leader, anybody else we need to help us get through this, the financial secretary, the treasurer, and the business administrator. So if that's who we are on this committee, then what are we supposed to do? And the discipline was very clear. It gave us the steps we're supposed to take as the Finance Committee. So I want you to hear these really clearly. Number one is we supervise the work of the financial secretary and we designate the counters. We supervise the work of the financial secretary, and we'll talk more about what the financial secretaries do. But we also designate the counters. We do not leave the selection of counters to the financial secretary so that there's no conflict of interest considered there. We supervise the work of the treasurer. Treasurer, here's how we're going to spend the money. Here's the budget. We're watching to be sure you're remaining in the budget. You're following your processes of internal control and audit. We supervise the work of the treasurer. Does it begin to make sense? While those two people cannot have a vote when they're paid. Our first big job is establishing the written financial policies to document the internal controls. Internal controls are the most important thing you will write and review as the Finance Committee because it directs overall how our team works together, and we'll talk much more about that. Once we found ourselves working through the process, doing the internal controls the way the local church has called us to do them, then we've got to make provision for an audit. The discipline is very clear. Every church shall be audited every year. Now, you CPAs sitting out there, don't have a heart attack. They're not thinking of audit in the terms we as CPAs think of an audit. It's an independent review of the financial records. More to come on that in a few minutes. We recommend, as the Finance Committee, to the Church Council where the deposits should be put. What bank are we going to use as our depository? You see, Finance Committee should not get tied into selecting what bank we're using. It becomes a conflict of interest. There should be recommendations. We're using this bank because they carry our note. We're using this bank because we've learned they've got electronic processes for receiving money or dispersing money. And we recommend to you, Admin Council, here's what we need to do. And so, Finance Committee, study it, figure it out, and then provide a list of recommendations for the Church Council to decide what should be our bank account. Now let's don't change it every year, folks. Those checks are expensive to buy. And so buy what you need, maybe for a year or two. Don't change the bank process. This Patriot Act has just been a horrific work on the banks and the people signing checks, because everybody has to go together at the same time to the bank to sign the signature card. It's not the good old days when, oh, I'll run by Tuesday and sign, you run over there Thursday and sign, and they don't care if we're signing until we get everybody on there. No. Let's find our way into choosing a bank. Let's be very responsible in how we do that, and let's make changes when necessary. We've got to be sure that contributions for designated causes must be followed. That is a must. Because if I give you money and tell you I want this room painted purple, the next time I walk into it and see that it's been painted, it better have been purple if you spent my money. Now, you may say, gosh, David, you know, this room really needs painting, but purple's not quite the color. It doesn't match the brown. So could we paint it macadamian? That's a new color I've learned. I really like macadamian. Maybe you'd say, David, can't we paint it macadamian? And I would say to you, yes, that's fine. Now, Finance Committee, really Financial Secretary, get it in writing that David said it's okay to change the color, because we must follow the cause for which the money's been given. And if you think about it, that's only building trust in the donors to the church. I'll give you money and I have full trust that you will spend it as I told you to spend it. So be careful with those designated causes. When you break 10% in designated causes, you're beginning to tie the hands of the Finance Committee and the Admin Council in doing the ministry that God's called us to do, because we've taken the place of God. We've said, you know, we know better what we need to do than hearing the call on our life as a church by God. So let's hold those designated causes down the best we can through the Stewardship Committee. Aha! We see why they're important. And then we'll be able to do and be ready to do in response to God's call. We compile a budget annually and submit it to the church council for approval. Two things important there. Number one, we compile it. We don't make up the budget ourselves. It's our job to reach out to all the different committees and say, how much money do you need to do what you believe God's calling you to do? Tell us what you need. And then the Finance Committee begins to put it together. Remember the 40 to 50% for pastor parish, 15 to 25% for trustees. Programmatic ends up in 10 to 15%, as well as operating will end up in 10 to 15%. How do we put that together, and how do we look at how much money we have to spend? And then we're able to compile a budget. More to come on budget preparation. And then, once we've done all of this work, we report to the church council on all funds, including the designated funds. We cannot allow funds to be designated and then keep them a secret. Secrets were not made for Finance Committee in the local church. So we want to be sure that we report to the church council all designated funds and all funds as we've spent them. Some of the functions and responsibilities: the committee shall give stewardship of financial resources priority, not just in October, but throughout the year. You know, we just really believe October is when we're supposed to talk about budget, when we figure out what the budget's going to be, and the preacher preaches in October, and then the other 11 months we don't even talk about stewardship. God gives us stuff every day of the year. So how can we not pay attention throughout the year, stewardship of the financial resources that God's given us? We've got to do it that way. We've got to explore creative ways with the church council to turn the congregation into a tithing, oh Lord have mercy, tithing. Can't believe I said that. But I did. It's a United Methodist Church. We're moving along. Turn them into a tithing congregation with an attitude of generosity. Now that simply means this: I need to be giving my 10% to the church to do the work God's called us to do. But I also need to do it with an attitude of generosity, not, Lord, if I'd only given 5%, I could have bought that new car that I wanted with that other 5%. No. We give with a happy, grateful heart to the ministry God's called us to do. And so the discipline is now calling us to figure ways to help the church turn a congregation into tithing. Tithing is not just Baptist, folks. They do a wonderful job, but I'm going to tell you what, the Church of God in Christ does even a better job. They hit that tithing mark, and their average is somewhere between 17 and 25%. Wow, something for us to strive for. But let's strive for 10%, because the average United Methodist gives 1 3/4% to the church. Now, that may be what we believe today is a tithe, but you know and I know the Bible says a tithe is 10%. So let's figure out how we change our church into a tithing church so that we show our generosity and do the work God's called us to do. Now, when we begin to think about our annual budget, we've got to remember all financial askings to be included in the annual budget come through the Finance Committee. Not to control, not to demand, but to know that if we're going to do this work and God's called us to do it, we need to know everything that's going to put a call on the finances to come to the Finance Committee so that the Finance Committee can do their job in reporting to the Admin Council to do their job in setting a budget. Now, you heard me say budget is set in the Admin Council. The reason for that is you're going to need to make changes in the budget. If you don't, you're not paying attention to your budget. Think about COVID. We set a budget back in November, October for our churches. COVID hit in February, March, and everything has changed, right? It definitely has. If we didn't have the ability to change our budget, we would not have the ability to be nimble, to be understanding, to watch our generosity, to deliver the funding to the areas God's called it to be. So budgets must be adopted at the Admin Council, and you can report it at the charge conference. But you don't want to have to ask your superintendent to come every time we need to change the budget. I hear in this day and age, sometimes that's monthly that budgets are changed. So set it at the Admin Council, that way you can do what you want to do. Compile the annual budget and submit it to the council for review and adoption. Just because you wrote it, finance friends, doesn't mean it's perfect. Matter of fact, it means it's a great start, but that Admin Council has the view of ministry and what we're going to do. We have to provide a program to be certain that the funding will meet the needs of the council adopted budget. We've got to provide funding for the programs that will meet the need for the council adopted budget. In other words, you don't say, oh yeah, we can do that program because I like that one. Yeah, we can do that one. We say, you requested X number of dollars. We were able to raise that for you. Now, if you need more, we understand that. We'll be glad to come back to you and suggest where you can pull that money from. But we do not drive the car. We only make sure there's fuel in the vehicle that delivers the ministry and the mission work that's driven by the Admin Council. And we've got to administer the funds according to the instructions for the Admin Council, from the Church Council. Now, just because I like something doesn't mean I can put more money in it as the treasurer. What I've got to do is say, okay, Admin Council said we can do thus and so, we've got to do it. We follow the instructions of the Church Council. So I think you're beginning to get it now. It's not Finance Committee telling the Admin Council and Pastor Parish and trustees, here's what you got, here's what you can spend. It's Admin Council saying, here's what we're going to do programmatically in the church. And your job is to undergird us to make sure there's plenty of funding so that the plate is big enough that the ministry fits on it, and we've got the money necessary to do the work that God's called us to do. We've got to be certain that we follow those instructions. Do you kind of see how that's been flipped upside down? In the olden days, everybody believed the Finance Committee ran the church. Today, we know that's not true. Our job is simply to raise, to manage, and disperse the funds so that mission and ministry is done in the way that God has called on us to do it, and it's the Admin Council's responsibility to get it done. So we get to supervise the treasurer, we get to supervise the financial secretary, and we get to report, and we got it going. Now be very, very careful. Paragraph 258.4 simply states, and this is new in the 2016 discipline, no immediate family members of any appointed clergy can serve as the treasurer, the finance chair, the financial secretary, counter, or in any paid or unpaid position under the responsibilities of the Committee on Finance as directed herein. These restrictions would apply only to church or charges where the clergy serves. So if I've got a retiree or a family of a retiree in our church, then they can serve on those committees. It's who Bishop Swanson says is going to be the pastors of our churches, and they cannot serve on it. Now think about it. Every June, moving vans circle around. They pick up pastors, they move them here, there, and yonder. So what if you're one of those little churches, that the pastor's chair of finance, and the pastor's spouse is the treasurer, and the pastor's son is the financial secretary, and then the rest of the pastor's family is the finance committee, and everything is happily going along because pastors do exactly what they're called to do. They will do what God is calling them to do. But moving day came and went, and all of a sudden all the money got left on the altar Sunday morning because the new pastor didn't know it was their job to do that. Well, the General Conference figured that one out. 258.4, the immediate family nor the pastor can serve in these positions. Now, if you've got family of the pastor that lives in the church that's not living at home with the pastor, not a son and daughter living at home, brother, sister, parents living with the pastor, then they can serve on those committees. Don't exclude good workers in the church just because their parent happened to become their pastor for a while. Remember paragraph 258.4 and don't overuse the pastor. Let the pastor do what the pastor is called to do, and let those in administry do the work that God's called them to do. It's very important that every church have a gift policy. A gift policy needs to be in writing, and it needs to apply to all gifts. It needs to apply to limitations on non-cash gifts, as well as how do we create designated funds, and how do we accept restricted gifts. Now, I want you to think about a gift policy, and as soon as you get that internal control document written, then I want you to dive into the gift policy. If I brought you a purple water fountain with a big old elephant on the top of it, do you really think we need a purple elephant fountain inside the church? I don't think so. But everybody's thought, if somebody gives it to the church, we got to take it. Well, no. We need a policy that is very thoughtful in determining these non-cash gifts. Do we need them, and what can we do with them? Aunt Sally may die, and the family may say, oh, Aunt Sally had such a wonderful bedroom suit. We want to give it to the pastor because we hear the pastor needs a new bedroom suit. Well, that antique dresser, that antique chifforobe, as my grandmother used to call it, the side tables, all that antique furniture may just be great, but Lord have mercy, do you want to sleep on a 70-year-old mattress that looks like mountains, that just rolls across there? No. So here's what you do. You say, wow, we would love to have that antique furniture, but we bought the pastor new mattresses the other day, so tell you what we're going to do. We're going to receive your gift of that bedroom suit. We're so thankful for Aunt Sally's gift to us. Now, we're going to put the furniture in the parsonage. Yeah, that'll be a great place to put it, or we may use it around the church. We're going to use that furniture, but we're going to take those mattresses to Goodwill, and we're going to give them to Goodwill so that somebody that doesn't have a place to sleep tonight has at least got something that's a little soft to sleep on. You see, that's how we share those non-cash gifts. What do we need? What's God called us to do? Will these fit in the package we have? And then we say thank you or no thank you. But remember, that policy must be adopted, the board must understand it, and the donors must be aware of the policy. Now think about this policy for just a minute. Once you create a designated fund, the governing body cannot change it. So I want to be careful in how I create a designated fund. It's going to be there forever. So it might be that we create a designated fund to buy a new van to take the kids to camp on. And once we raise enough money to buy that van, then anything above it before the gifts stop coming in goes into the transportation expense budget or goes into the general fund or goes somewhere. But don't let it just stay there forever. I've got a $50 fund on the conference budget that was given that we hadn't been able to spend yet, and it didn't have a sunset rule to it. So we want to be careful. We want to be careful. So designated funds, how do we set them up? All of that fits in this written policy. But remember, the governing body has got to communicate to the donor before and in writing that it reserves the right to change the terms of the designation. The board is free to change or eliminate the designated fund. So if you forget to put a sunset clause inside a designated fund, this piece allows the board to make that decision before and in writing before you receive it. So how does that policy work? Here's the way you'd put it together. You've got to go in, put it in writing, dream through that, carry it from the Finance Committee to the Admin Council, review it, think about it, is that what we need? We go back and forth. It may take 2 or 3 months to get that policy written. Then we want to get it adopted. Once adopted, then we want to carry it to the church. And we want to say, here's how we're going to begin to handle gifts, cash and non-cash, coming to the church. And we want you aware of it. And this will start 6 months down the road, folks. You can't adopt it today and put it in effect tomorrow. 9 months, 10 months, something in that line would be a good time frame. So I would begin it. I would think about it. I would have it published around the building on the appropriate bulletin boards in the appropriate places in the local church about this gift policy. Once the gift policy is in place, then you're able to say, now we're going to begin to live by this. When someone makes a designated gift, then you want to pull that policy back out and you want to say, now remember we have this policy, just want to be sure you're okay with it. You might do that for the first year that the policy's in place. If people feel that we have a policy, we've disclosed it, we've made it very accessible, and we remind people of it, then they know we're going to spend their money like they're supposed to. But they also know if we find ourselves in a situation as we are today, then we can change those designations to where they need to be to make sure that the gifts to God that came from those gracious givers through our church are doing the ministry they're called to do. Now remember this, the IRS says we've got to send out acknowledgments of donations of $250 or more each time. Well, that's good. I'm glad the IRS is requiring that and not letting people take donations. That's all well and fine. That's a political side of the government that's made that decision. We got to tell who it is, the amount, no goods or services were received. But that's not what's important, folks. What's important is every time somebody gives you a check, thank them. Maybe you start sending a letter out every time a check comes in over $250 from someone that's not a member. Maybe you do that on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. You see, saying thank you is important. People will hear thank you after you've said it 6 or 7 times. So reinforce that thank you. Send out that information, but also don't forget that January 31 is when those letters of donations of $250 or more are required to be in people's hands. But good stewardship simply says, thank them as you receive it. Because if I say thank you, I'll probably get another one pretty quickly. Why do you think St. Jude, Make-A-Wish, March of Dimes, Paralyzed Veterans, why do you think those people, as soon as you send them a donation, they send you another letter saying thank you? Because there's an envelope inside and they hope they'll send you another one. Boy, do we have a lot to learn from people other than those called United Methodist on fundraising, on stewardship, on gracious giving. So as we think about it, that's what the Finance Committee is responsible for. We raise it, we manage it. Do we earn interest on it? Is now the time to earn interest, or does it need to go into the checking account because the account's low? Raise it, manage it, and disperse it like we want to. Oh, no, not like we want to. How do we disperse that money? Under the direction of the Admin Council. So you see, raising, managing, dispersing It's what we're called to do as the Finance Committee, and we do that through supervising the work of the Financial Secretary who takes it in and the Treasurer who spends it, all in accordance with how the Admin Council said we're to do our work. Hopefully this will help your Finance Committee begin the new journey on which they're on and understand what they've said yes to at this point.